Number one question we're getting asked at the moment, particularly when it comes to advice process, is what are firms who are winning doing with paraplanning? And this question comes up irrespective of whether you're a consulting client of Finura's. We've got a lot of prospective clients now, pretty large institutions that are working through this. And, there would have been many people who probably thought reasonably that AI just would have solved all of this. But it's been 22 years since I've been a paraplanner, and we're still grappling with this one. And I think it's actually getting worse. We were going through some interesting data the other day with some partners of ours, and we found that advice production time is actually going backwards. So here's some fun facts, stuff I did with the Hub 24 team recently. So advice production time is actually going backwards across the industry. So even all the things we thought would improve this. And I have to say, I have a bit of a theory that the issue we have here is that we put advice production on the back burner in the industry because we thought QAR was going to solve the problems, now DBFO, which turned out to be a complete nothing burger. And lo and behold, our data at least is showing that advice production is actually, we had a dip in 2024. It's actually going up again in terms of that's required. So end of the day, SOAs are here to stay. We need to find a way to solve for this. And certainly some technology is a big part of that. We're doing a lot of work in that space. But the humans in the loop, irrespective of how much technology or AI or anything you propose to use, are still one of the biggest challenges we have. So number one question we're getting asked by our customers is, how do we optimize for the paraplanning structure? And fair to say, paraplanning is a pretty big cost in a business, whether it's software or whether it's the people side of it. We hear many businesses sort of well into the six digits for their paraplanning expenses most years, which is not surprising because businesses are growing. So great problem to have is my perspective on this stuff. But ultimately what we get to is what's the right model. And since we really started getting going with advice designer properly and now getting quite across a large group of businesses using it, it's starting to become quite obvious to us what sort of models are working and what aren't, to an extent. And we've still got further work to go on this, and there's no necessarily a full right or wrong. But I thought I'll just go through what the models we see are, what the pros and cons of each are, and maybe some of the linkages in the chain that we see potentially, that we need to improve. So we see these four across the businesses. So we see effectively all in-house, and that works well. Generally speaking, having someone right beside you is a good thing. These are expensive resources, so granted, this may not be a luxury that all businesses can have. Some of these people will often wear dual hats. They will do other roles in the business, we tend to find, so it's not just full-time paraplanning. All external, so definitely saw this model over the last decade become quite prevalent. The growth of the major outsourcing businesses is a real testament to that. And from what we're seeing, that's now starting to change somewhat. But these large offshore paraplanning teams, people getting mixed results, fair to say. So that's been a model. The hybrid, so definitely where people have probably done either they've only used external for overflow, let's call it, which is a little bit half in, half out, because how do you get a real cadence and momentum with someone if you're just sort of, half pregnant with this stuff? And I know quite a few of the outsourcing businesses won't even support that. The only model that works hybrid well there is potentially we have an onshore paraplanner that you have a more tighter relationship with. But this also can apply to the processes themselves, I'll get to in a minute. And the last one's sort of this final mile. So really where it's just, this is more about process, where literally the advisor's pretty much hands off until the SOA is ready to go. So let's just talk about these processes and how they work. So with the briefing side of it, this fundamentally, I would say maybe the difference here is if you do have an in-house paraplanner, there's a good chance that in this area here, the paraplanner could be more involved. Now, I think this should be getting much better than what it is, particularly with AI. Like the quality of the file notes are now so good that I would hope that the time that you're freeing up as an advisor by not having to, do these crazy file notes can be freed up to actually do better quality paraplanning briefs. So I would have thought this should be getting a lot better in this model. If they're in-house, irrespective of where you are, this should improve. That's not always the case, though. Still got a lot of criticism from paraplanners not getting properly briefed from their advisor. I think the big one here is incomplete data. still finding its way through. So, and certainly what I see some paraplanning businesses doing, TNT is a good example probably, where they're now saying, hey, we'll take over that part of the process too and make sure we have absolutely everything we need before we even get started on the plan. You've got to remember, the biggest thing we see is that this entire process for paraplanning just never happens in a straight line. There is always little breaks along the way. We don't have that. We've got to go back to the client. We've got to go back to the advisor. And then every one of these times we do it, we're adding, I reckon, 3 days every time. This is what we've got to stop. So all in-house, and certainly people using our software, that's what we're seeing. Effectively, the advisor's really just front and back of it. There might be some little conversations happening in the middle around the strategy side of it, just to double check things, sense check things, or if new information evolves. But broadly speaking, that model is pretty good. I'd also say it's quite incentivized. So obviously the paraplanner is acutely aware of when the client's coming in. They're front of mind, and often they're involved in some of these meetings with the client. So I can sort of understand that model working quite well. All external. Again, the benefit here is if you do run a fairly standard, highly structured advice business and you can implement well here, this can work quite successfully. But in this model, what we're finding is that there is often a bit of a disconnect between how do we take those advice requirements and then drop them into a process that works for you, and what are the check-in points? What are the points that are the expectation of the advisor? They can come in and check how things are progressing, see how the strategy is shaping up before they just get a document. The number one bit of, I guess, feedback we get about this model is that when it comes to this point here, SOA arrives maybe 24 hours, if not shorter, before the client's coming in. And then there's a no shit moment, usually about 5:30, 6 o'clock the night before, saying, this is wrong. Therefore, advisor needs to jump back in here. Big problems. Everyone gets pissed off. Seeing a lot of that, hearing a lot of stories around that one. Hybrid, don't mind this one. So effectively, we are seeing more models where, particularly our advice designer customers actually, where they run their instance of their advice designer, their X-plan, their modelling stuff. And what they say to the paraplan is, look, we've pretty much picked the strategies we want to run with. Can you just model these out according to these requirements? Use AI to help build that stuff out. And effectively, we can actually create a process that works for the software to do that. The advantage we've got, I suppose, and how we've built our software is we've really thought about that. So if you just follow my lead here a little bit, in terms of our advice, we have a pretty structured advice workflow here that we use for Advice Designer. And it does allow that an advisor and a paraplanner can effectively be in here at the same time. Now, we don't want them overriding each other, but let's say it's something like modelling. Well, effectively, the paraplanner's done their work, modelling. If the advisor wants to check out how it's going, they don't need to jump into X-plan. They can actually look at the modelling that's been done for the client and just jump straight into the system. Look at the charts, discuss it with the paraplanner, potentially share the screen. So they're actually talking together on the same thing effectively like that. And then really then when it comes to the strategy content, everything we're doing for the client here and all that, I suppose those personalised types of things, the advisor can quite easily come in here and finish a fair bit of it. And therefore, they're effectively getting what they want at the end of the process. Where at the moment what we hear is a lot of people are actually not getting what they want, suffer in silence, and then they end up just rewriting the whole plan anyway. So I think, that when that stuff happens, that's when we have, that can be a big fail. So that is definitely somewhere where I think technology plays a pretty important role. The hybrid model also works really well because you can just sort of break up. You might have a paraplanner that does all that, and this is modelling and research, I should say, or can do the drafting, the SOA, and you can sort of decide between yourselves what are the trigger points. So what are the things that I will do? So if let's say it's a more complex piece of advice and it's outside of that paraplanner's wheelhouse, for example, you can use the advisor and say, you know what, I'm going to do all that, or I'm going to have my internal paraplanner do most of that work. So those models can really, really work, I think, quite well. What we are still seeing for the all in-house models is that they are still, for this final mile, let's call it, the advisor does step in at the end, definitely with Advice Designer. So we are finding that for our practices, I guess, that are using this well, is that they will have the paraplanner do their part, but before the SOA is even produced. So before it's even produced, the advisor comes in and checks everything okay. And I guess the advantage with the way we've built our system is that once you do, the SOA comes out in the digital presentation and all those things, there's no surprises. It's exactly what's in here. So you can actually quickly go through, particularly once you get used to the content and the templates and everything, and actually go, I know exactly what I'm going to get out of this. There's no surprises. So now this is all caveated on this person being really happy that what they're getting out, they're happy with. So if we are in an endless loop where one advisor in the practice keeps changing the fonts and keeps stuffing around with different little bits and pieces, then we're probably never going to get out of this loop. We're just always going to be back to this model as well. So in a perfect I don't really think there's a right, sorry, my microphone's stuffed up. I don't think there's a right or wrong on all this, but what I would say is choosing the right model is important. I think having the one model for the business is important and not a combination of all four. We've actually seen businesses that actually each advisor does their own thing and it just becomes really hard to scale across the practice. So some tougher decisions need to be made. But I believe, if it was me, I would definitely still lean on having my paraplanners do a lot of this heavy-hitting modelling. I just think that's a world where it's deterministic, it's the one area that we can get things wrong, and it's really a technical skill set they've got, which is great. When it comes to drafting of SOAs, I think tech is playing a huge role in this now. Obviously, we're doing a lot in this space, so are others, and what I don't really want to see in businesses that I work with is where this one becomes, a plus 10-hour exercise. Sorry, my writing's terrible. So that's plus 10 hours on the drafting piece. Because what happens is that happens, and then for whatever reason, it just ends up back in this feedback loop where it goes and things are changed again. But can I tell you, things change through the modelling and the research and the strategy process. Those three things are quite dynamic. And the number one thing that we have found our users love is the fact that if you do change any of the modelling or the research in our tools, you don't need to start from scratch with the advice. So we have these buttons all along the way, which are not used enough, called refresh, where effectively you can refresh all the data from the modelling, from a source of truth, no tricks, just exactly what you're going to get. And then that flows through to the advice document, it flows through to our digital presentation, everything gets updated instantly. So the big killer that no one seems to really want to talk about, in my opinion, is reworks. And they can double, triple cost the time to reproduce SOAs. And that's what we've got to solve fundamentally, because they do happen all the time. So we have lots of good resources on our website about this stuff. Our Nura team are really happy to help with advice process design. We do a lot of consulting in that space. We're doing some work for some really big companies now on this, which is quite cool. And they're looking at AI and technology and other different pieces like that. But if you want to get a sense of what these reworks are potentially costing you, have a bash through our ROI calculator. We don't even put reworks in this one. Gee, we've got to change that, because I reckon reworks are costing a fortune. Anyway, and it'll really show you. And I think the thing we are finding too is that these external models, external and hybrid, they're almost covering up the real cost, because these businesses are often wearing a lot of the cost inefficiency. They're on fixed price revenue models. It's not great for them either, but they're pretty reluctant to charge the advisor more because they're worried about losing you as a client. But we actually don't know the true cost of what these reworks are. So I think, we're talking to our team a lot at the moment about, not just about, the standard consulting model we do and even the software implementation side of stuff we do, but it is a bit about process re-engineering, and it's tough and it requires change management. I think we've got some of the best people in the market doing that stuff, but we need direction and support from the business owners and the advisors to make those changes. Otherwise, it simply doesn't work. All we need is one advisor in practice to just, buck the system. And I was talking to one CEO firm yesterday that's signing onto our platform, which is quite cool. And he said, well, there's going to be two service propositions internally. There's the 7-day service proposition. You get your advice back in 7 days, ready to go for the client. And there'll be the plus 30-day proposition for, Bill or Melinda who wants it special. I mean, that's where we get to. So I'll leave some resources on the video. We've got a few social things coming out soon. We'll probably do some webinars on this, actually, I think, because I think this is where we need to spend more time as an industry getting this right.